Since the inception of video games, developers and players alike have been searching for a way to make games as immersive as possible, with a high feeling of player agency and open-ended gameplay, while still being able to tell a convincing and gripping story. There are a few games that have come close to this, such as Mass Effect, Skyrim and Fallout, but one series that started 19 years ago is the one I love most, and that is Deus Ex. A series set in the not so far future, which has a truly riveting story with strong gameplay to navigate you through the game. The last release of the franchise was Deus Ex: Mankind Divided back in 2016. Since then the series has officially been put on ice, with not even a scent of a sequel in the near future. To examine why the series has disappeared, we're going to focus on the soft reboot of the series, which started with Deus Ex: Human Revolution, which came out in 2011. This was meant to be the catalyst for the series' new trilogy in the Deus Ex franchise, which focused on the story of its main character, Adam Jensen. Deus Ex: Human Revolution opens with Adam Jensen working as a private bodyguard for a company called Sarif Industries, which focuses on the development of human body augmentations, which started off as enabling people who had suffered limb losses to regain artificial limbs with the same functionality as someone who had not lost a limb. But over time, the augmentations of human body parts had become more commercially viable, and Sarif Industries began selling them to anybody who could afford it so that they could physically enhance their bodies, and even developing augments which would enable the military to turn their soldiers into heavily augmented war machines. After a brief discussion with Jensen's ex-partner, Megan, Jensen gets into a discussion with his boss and owner of Sarif Industries, David Sarif. Sarif Industries was now on the verge of developing a new version of physical augmentation, which would remove the need for users of augments to have to take Neuropozyne, which was sold by a private pharmaceutical called Taeyong Medical. Anyone who had augments had to take this drug, as a human body rejects augmentations. And of course, as most video games go, Sarif Industries was suddenly attacked by a group of terrorists who referred to themselves as the Tyrants, who had heavy military augmentations and began to slaughter all the staff. Jensen rushes through the building to try and find his ex Megan, but after a brutal attack from one of the augmented troops, Adam is left for dead with his ex Megan also presumed dead. Fast forward 6 months, and we discover that David Sarif had in fact retrieved Jensen from that building and heavily augmented Adam, turning him into a half-man, half-machine super soldier. Strangely enough, Adam's body does not reject the augments, therefore not needing the drug Neuropozyne. But Adam is at war with himself, questioning his humanity and what it meant for him on a larger scale. David Sarif contacts Adam to tell him of another attack on Sarif Industries. Adam then sets out to track down the terrorists and find out why they had attacked the company. After a series of missions, Adam finds himself at Taeyong Medical and discovers evidence that Taeyong Medical had a hand in the attack, and that Megan and a few other scientists were indeed alive, and that somehow Eliza Kassan, the news reporter for the biggest news outlet in the world, Pikers News, was also involved. Adam confronts Eliza and asks what her involvement was, and to his surprise, discovers that she was in fact an artificial intelligence constructed to influence and manipulate the world media, and that the organisation behind creating her seek to control global interests. After Jensen's discoveries, he returns to David Sarif with his findings, and is confronted with the truth that an organisation known as the Illuminati are behind all the attacks, and that they are the orchestrators of everything in an attempt to build a new world order. Jensen then travels to an offshore facility where he believes he might find Megan and the other scientists. Jensen finds Megan at the facility, who tells him that she believes she was kidnapped for her research into augmentation rejection. She confesses that her research for a cure into augmentation rejection was in fact based off Adam. This explains why Adam did not need neuropoison when he was heavily augmented. Moments later, a TV broadcast is sent round the world by a man called Hugh Darrow. Hugh Darrow is the original inventor of human augmentation, but now after being manipulated by the Illuminati, believes that humanity had been lost and that he must restore it by wiping out anyone who had augmentations. He achieves this by activating a microchip which had been implanted into anyone who had been to Titan Medical that sends him into a murderous frenzy. Jensen, amid the chaos, then sets out to stop the signal from being broadcast to save those who had been sent under the craze and stop the mass murders taking place. Jensen breaks into the facility where the TV is being broadcast and is met again by Eliza Kassan, who presents him with a series of choices. Spin the story to put the blame on a pro-human organisation so to protect the advancement of augmentations. Broadcast the truth, which would make humanity hate and fear augmentations. Or blow up the facility so that no one would be able to find out what truly happened and spin the story to their own agenda. The canon ending is that Jensen does indeed blow up the facility in an attempt to stop anyone from spinning the story, and the game ends with a monologue from Adam explaining why he chose to hide the truth, but also prevent the story from being spun. The storytelling of Human Revolution is truly groundbreaking and ties together so many subplots and different themes to create one of the most engaging beginnings to a rebooted saga. Most games nowadays try their best not to tackle important plots and themes, but Human Revolution wears it on its sleeve. From major companies innovating in an attempt to make our lives easier and safer, to medical companies holding off on research in an attempt to keep their financial gain high. The gameplay of Deus Ex is just the icing on the cake. Human Revolution is an open-world action RPG stealth game with dialogue choices that have real consequences and true player agency and level design. Jensen's augmentations allow the player to take advantage of his new abilities to enable him to level the playing field if needs be. But if you're like me and prefer the stealth approach, that is also easily achievable by being able to jump to high heights and hack terminals to bypass heavily guarded areas. The standout for myself in Human Revolution's gameplay is the dialogue choices. Throughout the game you get into contextual conversations with numerous characters, and depending on what you choose to say, will affect the outcome of your story. Few games have been able to achieve this to a level where you feel like the character is making choices that truly feel like they impact the game, but also feel natural and not like an out of place choice made by yourself. The game even throws quite heavy scenarios at you, such as a hostage situation in which the wrong choice could result in the death of an innocent victim. Human Revolution was met with a great critical response, and sold well enough to warrant a sequel. And that sequel, in 2016, was Mankind Divided. 2 years after the events of Human Revolution, we find ourselves in a world turned on its head. The poor have now become the rich. The augmented weak with decaying bodies from their lack of neuropoison, and now treated as outcasts to society, discriminated publicly by having to go through additional security checks at train stations and only allowed in certain areas of the cities. The way Mankind Divided tackles this world is uncomfortably familiar to how it was back in the 1950s when racism was around. We find Jensen now part of a private task force called TF-29, led by Jim Miller as a double agent to take down the Illuminati from the inside. Jensen finds himself amidst a terrorist attack at a train station. Shortly after escaping, Jensen eavesdropped on his boss Miller, who discloses to his superiors that they were going to pin the bombing on an organisation called ARC, the Augmented Rights Coalition. Jensen is commanded by his boss Miller to confront the leader of ARC, Rucker, and take him down. Rucker begins to tell Jensen that he was actually trying to find out who was behind the attack, but before he could say anything more, his augmentations began to turn on him and killed him. Marchenko, an Illuminati-aligned Aug, takes Rook's place as leader of ARC, and steers them away from a peaceful approach and calls for a military uprising. Jensen finds out that Marchenko is planning an attack at a London Humanity Summit, and after successfully stopping the attack, the game ends. With a pretty tasty post-credit scene that the psychologist you speak with throughout the game between missions, Lara or Zen, is in fact a member of the Illuminati High Council, not Miller, but that is the end of the game. And that is what is disappointing about Mankind Divided. That for the amount of depth and spectacle we had in Human Revolution, this one falls so short. With a pretty rocky opening, which failed to explain the events between Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, and then for the story to abruptly end before it ever really felt like it started, it all just brought the game down. The gameplay was great and had enough advancements to make it feel refreshed, but the most pivotal part of the first game, the story, it just wasn't here. Why is that? Well, it turns out that the publisher behind Deus Ex, Square Enix, decided to try and capitalize on the franchise financially, and ordered the developers to cut the game in half so they could stretch out the franchise. This completely explains why the story felt so jarring and that it ended just as it begun. This inevitably hurt the game's rating substantially, and in turn the overall sales were extremely poor for what was meant to be one of the biggest releases of 2016. So it's almost not a surprise that it has disappeared without a word. But will it get a sequel? And will we get the closing to Adam Jensen's story? This is where it gets complicated. Publishers have to decide when the right time is to release a video game so that it makes a positive financial gain. As it stands today, there is a small pocket of people who want to see the conclusion of Jensen's story, but not enough in that pocket will buy the game to warrant financial gain. But if Square Enix don't at least announce a Deus Ex game in the next 2 years, there will be no point, as those people will have moved on, and the newcomers won't pick it up as they haven't played the original or heard much about it in such a long time. This is actually what happened with the original Deus Ex series, with the second title, Invisible War, in 2003, also not selling or being received well critically. It was eventually left for too long, and by that time the only way to get people to buy it was to reboot it with Human Revolution. Do I think we will see the return of Adam Jensen? I hold these games very high and would recommend anyone to play them. I'd love to see the conclusion to what was built up in Human Revolution, but looking at Square Enix's future releases, I can't see us getting another Deus Ex game announced for at least 3 years, and by that time it will most likely be a reboot taking place after the original games, not the Jensen stories. I believe they'll circle round to continue the original ones in an attempt to distance themselves from the poorly received Mankind Divided so that newcomers pick it up, but to also capture the nostalgia of those who played the original series. But what does that mean for those of us who want to see Jensen's story finished? Well, it's probably going to be tucked away somewhere in a codex of the next game, with a very wishy-washy conclusion to his story. TJFL, signing out.